Most people only see highways in passing. They see them through a car window on the way to somewhere else. A road trip. A vacation. A late drive home. They see gas stations, rest stops, truck stops, headlights sliding by in the dark, and they don't think much about it. But truck drivers see a different side of the road. They see what the highway becomes after midnight, when the exits get farther apart, when the radio starts fading in and out, when the only other lights for miles belong to strangers who may or may not be stopping for the same reasons you are. They see the forgotten roads behind old shipping yards. The empty loading docks at 3 in the morning. The motels with half their signs burned out. The places that stay open all night because people always need gas, coffee, and a place to sit until sunrise. And sometimes, they see things they can't explain. These are 3 long-haul trucker horror stories. My name's Aaron, and I drove long-haul for just under 8 years. When people find that out, they usually ask one of 2 questions. Either they ask if I liked it, or they ask if I ever saw anything creepy out on the road. The answer to the first one is yes, mostly. The answer to the second one is also yes. The story I always think about first happened in western Kansas during my 3rd year driving. It was late November, and I was running a refrigerated load overnight. I'd started that day in Colorado and was trying to make good time heading east. Anybody who's driven those stretches of highway out there at night knows how empty they can feel. Not peaceful empty either. More like abandoned. Long black roads, flat land, cold wind rocking the trailer, and the occasional farm light so far off it looks like it's floating. That night the weather was bad in a way that makes everything feel smaller. Not a full snowstorm, not yet, but icy drizzle mixed with wind. Enough to blur the windshield if you weren't staying on top of the wipers. Enough to make the road shine in that greasy gray way that makes you grip the wheel a little tighter. I'd been driving for hours with almost nothing on the radio except static and weak country stations fading in and out. I remember checking the clock on the dash and seeing it was a little after 1:30 in the morning. I was tired, but not dangerously tired. Just that normal dead feeling you get halfway through a night run, when your body keeps trying to remind you it should be asleep. The road was empty for miles. Then I saw her. At first it was just movement in the shoulder beam, something pale near the right side of the road. I instinctively eased off the gas, thinking maybe it was a deer, but then the headlights caught her fully and I saw it was a person. A woman. She was standing on the shoulder near one of those little emergency turnoffs, wearing a light-colored jacket and dark pants. No car. No hazard lights. No other people. Just standing there in freezing drizzle at 1:30 in the morning. The second I passed her, my stomach tightened. It wasn't because of how she looked exactly. It was because of where she was. There was nothing out there. No exit. No houses. No businesses. Not even one of those broken-down gas stations you sometimes see miles off an old highway. Just open land and road. I drove another quarter-mile thinking about it. In trucking, you learn to mind your business. That's a big rule. Don't stop for every strange thing you see. Don't get involved in situations that feel wrong. A lot of drivers will tell you that bluntly because the road has enough risks already. But I kept seeing her in my mirror in my head. A woman alone in weather like that. Maybe her car was down in the ditch. Maybe she'd been in an accident. Maybe someone had left her there. So I did something I wouldn't do now. I slowed down, checked both mirrors, and pulled onto the shoulder a good distance ahead of where I'd seen her. My plan was simple. Keep the truck running, crack the passenger window, ask if she needed me to call state patrol or roadside assistance. Nothing more. I put on my hazards and waited. The wipers kept scraping across the windshield. The cab hummed. Trailer lights glowed red in the wet dark behind me. For about 15 seconds, I didn't see her. Then she came walking into the reach of my side mirror. Slowly. Head down a little against the rain. There was something odd about the way she moved. Not limping, not stumbling. Just slow. Measured. Like she wasn't cold at all. She reached the passenger side and looked up at me through the glass. She was maybe mid-30s. Wet hair stuck to the sides of her face. Skin pale enough to look gray in my cab light. No blood, no obvious injuries, nothing dramatic like that. I lowered the passenger window about 2 inches. "You okay?" I asked. She just looked at me for a second. Then she said, "Can you give me a ride to the next town?" Her voice was quiet but clear. I said, "I can call somebody for you. State Patrol, maybe." She shook her head once. "No police." That immediately put me on edge. I said, "You got car trouble? Where's your vehicle?" She turned and pointed back into the dark behind us, not directly at the road, more out into the fields. "It's stuck." I tried to see anything back there through the rain and darkness, but there was nothing. No headlights. No taillights. No flashers. "How far?" I asked. She didn't answer that. Instead she said, "Please. I just need to get to the next town." Her eyes were what really got to me. Not because they looked supernatural or anything stupid like that. They just looked wrong for the situation. Too calm. Too fixed. If I had to describe it, I'd say she didn't look scared enough. A normal person stranded in freezing rain on an empty highway at that hour would either be panicking or at least relieved to see another human being. She looked either. She looked like she'd already decided how this was going to go. I said, "I can't let anybody in the cab. Company policy." That part was technically true, though I was mainly saying it because my gut was screaming at me. She stared for another second. Then she asked, "Are you alone?" I wish I could explain exactly why that question bothered me so much. Maybe because it came too fast. Maybe because of the way she asked it with no change in expression. But the second I heard it, something in me went cold. I lied immediately. "No," I said. "Team driver's asleep in the bunk." That wasn't true. I was alone. She looked past me into the cab, toward the dark sleeper compartment. Then she nodded once. And smiled. Not warmly. Not gratefully. Just a small, flat smile. "Okay," she said. "Then you should go." That smile stayed on her face as she stepped back from the truck. I reached for my phone. No signal, I muttered to myself, though I checked anyway. Nothing. I looked back toward her to tell her I'd drive until I found service and call it in. She wasn't there. At first I thought she just moved out of sight below the passenger door, but when I leaned over and checked the mirror, the shoulder was empty. I actually opened the door and stood on the step to look around. Nobody. Just wet blacktop, wind, and rain. There was nowhere she could have gone that fast. Not without me seeing her. The ditch beside the shoulder was shallow and open. The land around it was flat. No trees. No buildings. No fences. No underpass. Nothing. I climbed back in fast and locked both doors. I'm not proud of this part, but I sat there for maybe a full minute with my hands on the wheel, not moving, just staring into the mirrors and trying to decide what I'd actually seen. Then headlights appeared behind me. One set. A pickup truck. It had been far enough back that I hadn't seen it before, but now it was slowing as it approached my trailer. My first stupid thought was relief. Maybe it was another driver or a local who'd stopped for the woman too. But then the pickup slowed even more. Then it stopped directly behind my trailer on the shoulder with its lights still on. I couldn't see much except the glare in my side mirrors. Nobody got out. The pickup just sat there. I waited maybe 10 seconds, then 20. Still nothing. Then the driver's side door opened. A man got out. He was wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap. I remember that because the cap brim caught some of my trailer light. He started walking toward my cab. Not toward where the woman had been. Straight toward my truck. My whole body went rigid. I threw the truck into gear and pulled back onto the highway without even checking as carefully as I normally would have. The pickup stayed on the shoulder for a second, then pulled out behind me. I told myself not to panic. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe he'd only stopped to see if I needed help. But he stayed behind me. Not right on me, but there. The next 10 miles were some of the longest I've ever driven. Every now and then, the pickup would drift a little closer, then farther back. Never passing. Never turning off. Just sitting there in the dark behind my trailer. I kept trying my phone. No signal. Then I saw a blue services sign ahead showing a truck stop at the next exit. Tiny place, not one of the big chains, but it was open 24 hours according to the sign. I took the exit. So did the pickup. At that point I was fully scared. I pulled into the brightest part of the truck stop lot I could find, near the entrance and under 2 floodlights. There were maybe 7 or 8 semis parked there and a few passenger vehicles by the diner section. The pickup rolled in behind me, then stopped across 2 spaces about 50 yards away. The driver didn't get out. I grabbed my phone, wallet, and the heavy flashlight I kept in the door pocket, then went straight inside the truck stop. The place smelled like burnt coffee and fryer oil. 1 cashier. 2 guys in reflective work jackets eating at a booth. A tired-looking waitress wiping a table. Nothing unusual, which somehow made me feel even stranger. I went to the counter and told the cashier I needed to call highway patrol because I thought I was being followed and there had been a stranded woman back on the highway. She slid me the store phone without asking questions. I called it in. Gave mile marker info as best I could. The trooper who took the report asked me to stay there until someone checked the area. So I did. I stayed by the window where I could see my truck. The pickup remained parked under the edge of the lot lights for maybe 5 minutes. Then, very slowly, it pulled back onto the road and left. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. About 40 minutes later, a state trooper showed up and took my statement in person. He asked me to describe the woman and the pickup driver. Then he asked where exactly on the shoulder I'd stopped. When I told him, he got this look on his face I didn't like. He asked, "Did she try to get you out of the truck?" I said no. He nodded once, like that confirmed something. Then he told me there had been multiple reports over the last couple years of drivers seeing a stranded woman along that same stretch. Sometimes alone, sometimes near what looked like a disabled vehicle. In more than one case, when a driver stopped, another vehicle showed up shortly after. Robbery setups mostly. A couple assaults. One trucker ended up in the hospital. He said they believed it was a small group using a woman as bait because drivers were more likely to stop. That explained almost everything. Almost. What didn't fit was where she went. I asked the trooper if they'd found her that night. He said no. They checked the mile marker area and found tire tracks from a pickup on the shoulder, but no disabled vehicle, no woman, no footprints they could trust because of the weather. I drove out after sunrise because I didn't want to touch that road in the dark again until daylight. About a month later, I was cleaning the cab during a reset and found something shoved between the passenger seat and the door. A motel keycard. Plain white, no logo on it. I knew it wasn't mine. I barely ever stayed in motels on runs, and when I didn't bring the cards back into the truck. At first I figured it had just gotten there from some old driver before the truck was assigned to me. Then I turned it over. Written on the back in black marker were 3 words. You were alone. I sat there holding that card for a long time. Because if that message had anything to do with that night, then one of 2 things had to be true. Either the woman had gotten close enough to my passenger door to slip it in somehow, or somebody had already been inside my cab before I stopped at mile marker 214. To this day, I still don't know which one is worse. I got this story from a guy named Luis when I was still driving regional routes. We ended up parked next to each other one night at a truck stop in Tennessee, and after the usual talk about dispatch, bad loads, and weather, the conversation turned into weird things drivers had seen. Most of it was the normal stuff. Strange people at rest areas. Near misses. Stories that sound bigger in the middle of the night than they probably were. Then Luis told me one that felt different. It happened when he was hauling retail freight through Mississippi. He said he'd been running behind all day because of delays at a distribution center, and by the time he got his trailer loaded and sealed, it was already dark. The warehouse was outside a small town in a mostly industrial area, one of those places surrounded by chain-link fence, empty lots, and half-dead streetlights. His paperwork had gotten messed up twice, which meant he didn't pull out until just before midnight. He was tired and annoyed, but he only needed to drive another hour to a truck stop where he planned to shut down for the night. The first strange thing happened before he even left the yard. As he was walking around doing his final check, he heard a banging sound from inside the trailer. 3 hard knocks. He stopped and listened. Nothing. Now, anybody who's driven box trailers knows they make noises all the time. Freight shifts. Metal pops. Doors rattle. Temperature changes make things creak. He knew that. So he finished his inspection and climbed into the cab. Then he heard it again. 3 knocks. Heavy enough this time that he felt it through the frame. He got back out with his flashlight and checked the trailer doors, the seal, the undercarriage, all of it. Everything looked fine. He even listened with his ear near the trailer wall like in a dumb movie, half laughing at himself for doing it. Nothing. So he left. The route out of that industrial area took him down a frontage road lined with closed warehouses and empty loading docks. Luis said it was the kind of road where even your own headlights feel weak, because all they really do is show you more empty pavement and buildings that look shut down forever. He was maybe 10 minutes out when he heard the knocking again. This time it came from the trailer wall directly behind the cab. 3 knocks. Pause. Then 3 more. He told me he actually said out loud, "Nope." Because now it sounded too regular. He called dispatch first, more to keep himself awake and talking than anything else. He told the night dispatcher he thought freight might have shifted. The dispatcher asked if the trailer was pulling weird. Luis said no. "Then get to a safe place and check it," the dispatcher said. Safe place turned out to be the problem. That road had almost nothing on it. No open businesses. No traffic. No decent shoulder to pull onto. Just industrial buildings and stretches of fencing. The knocking didn't happen again for maybe 15 minutes. Long enough that he almost convinced himself he imagined the pattern. Then it came back. 3 knocks. 3 knocks. 3 knocks. He said it sounded like someone hitting from the inside with the flat of their hand. Not pounding for their life. Just knocking. Controlled. He reached for the CB and asked if any drivers were near him, more out of instinct than anything. Nobody answered. The highway interchange was still a few miles away. He decided to just keep driving until the truck stopped and not stop anywhere dark. Then he noticed headlights. A van had turned onto the road behind him. White cargo van. No markings. It stayed back for a while, then slowly closed the distance. Luis wasn't especially worried at first. Work van, late-night driver, whatever. But after a few minutes he realized the van wasn't trying to pass. It was staying directly behind the trailer doors. Then the knocking started again. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. And almost immediately after that, the van flashed its headlights twice. Luis told me that was the moment his skin went cold. Because it felt connected. He sped up. The van kept pace. He took a turn a little harder than normal onto the ramp leading to the interstate. The van stayed with him. Now he was thinking robbery, hijacking, something like that. Trailers full of consumer goods are targets, and guys absolutely do get watched leaving warehouses. So he grabbed his phone and prepared to call 911 if the van stayed on him past the next exit. But once he got onto the interstate with more traffic around, the van finally backed off. Not much. Just enough to blend in. The rest stop he'd planned to use was closed for construction, so he kept going to a truck stop another 20 miles ahead. By then it was around 1:40 in the morning. He pulled in, parked in a row near the back, and sat for a minute listening. Nothing. No knocking. No van in sight. He almost felt stupid again. Then someone knocked on his cab door. He jumped so hard he nearly dropped his phone. There was a guy outside wearing a reflective vest and a dark beanie. He looked like some kind of yard worker or maybe a driver. Luis cracked the window a little and said, "Yeah?" The guy pointed toward the trailer and said, "Your rear doors look messed up." Luis immediately started to get out, then stopped himself. "How messed up?" "Like maybe not latched all the way," the guy said. Luis looked in his mirrors. From that angle he couldn't really tell. He said, "Thanks." The guy just stood there. Then he added, "You want me to check?" Luis said no a little too fast. The man smiled faintly and walked away between the trucks. That whole exchange bothered him. Not enough to panic, but enough that he locked the doors again and waited. A few minutes later, another driver knocked on the passenger side and asked if he was okay, because apparently he'd seen Luis talking to someone and then sitting there. Luis asked if he'd seen where the guy in the vest went. The driver said, "What guy?" Luis looked out. Nobody was around the truck. Now he was fully on edge. He decided he wasn't sleeping until he physically checked the trailer. But he also didn't want to do that alone in the darkest section of a lot at 2 in the morning. So he waited until he saw 2 other drivers walking toward the store and asked one if he'd mind standing there a second while he looked. The driver agreed. They walked to the back of the trailer together. The seal was intact. The doors were fully latched. Nothing obviously wrong. Then Luis shined his flashlight lower. There were fresh scrape marks near the locking bars, like somebody had tried working something thin into the gap. His stomach dropped. The other driver saw it too and said, "You call this in?" Luis said not yet. Then they both heard something from inside the trailer. One knock. Just one. Not loud. But real. Both of them heard it. The other driver stepped back immediately and said, "Nah." Luis called the police and his company right there. A county deputy came out maybe 25 minutes later. Luis explained everything. The deputy looked skeptical until he inspected the doors and saw the marks himself. Because the load was sealed freight, they had to contact the company before opening it. That took forever. Luis waited in his cab, watching the trailer in the mirrors the whole time. Twice he thought he saw movement between trucks farther down the row, but whenever he aimed his light that way, there was nothing there. Finally, with company authorization, the deputy cut the seal and opened the trailer. The load was mostly stacked pallets of boxed merchandise. At first glance, everything looked normal. Then the deputy shined his flashlight along the left wall and said, "What the hell?" There was a narrow gap between two pallet stacks near the front. In that gap was a folding lawn chair, set up facing the trailer doors. Just sitting there. Luis swore to me he had no idea how it got there. The warehouse hadn't listed it. It wasn't on paperwork. It wasn't part of the freight. And on the seat of that folding chair was a half-empty bottle of water. The deputy asked if anyone had access to the trailer after it was loaded. Luis said only the warehouse crew. They checked more carefully after that and found something else. Near the chair, on the floor, was a cheap burner phone. Powered off. No contacts saved. No recent calls they could pull at the scene. Just a dead, unmarked phone and a chair positioned so somebody could sit in the dark and face the doors. The deputy went back to the truck stop office and pulled security footage. That was the part that really got me when Luis told it. The white cargo van had entered the lot less than 2 minutes after he did. It parked for about 30 seconds near the fuel island, then left. Nobody could get a clear plate. And the man in the reflective vest? He never showed up on camera at all. Not approaching the truck. Not walking away from it. Nothing. You can explain that part away if you want. Camera angle, bad coverage, blind spot. That's what I'd normally say too. But here's the part Luis didn't tell me until the end. A week after the incident, his company called him in for a follow-up because law enforcement had spoken to the warehouse. There had been another driver, 2 months earlier, who picked up from the same facility and reported hearing banging from a sealed trailer. He was told it was cargo settling and kept moving. He disappeared somewhere between Mississippi and Alabama. Truck found. Trailer mostly intact. Load partially missing. No sign of the driver. When police asked warehouse staff if anything strange had happened during that earlier loading, one forklift operator said he thought he saw a man already inside trailer door 7 before they finished the load. He assumed it was a supervisor checking counts. He never reported it because by the time he looked again, the man was gone. Luis's trailer that night was door 7. And the burner phone they found in the chair had one unsent draft text message saved on it. It said, "Wait until he sleeps." Luis quit over-the-road work less than a year later. He told me it wasn't because of that night alone. But then he looked at me for a second and said, "That was the last time I ever believed a locked trailer meant empty." I believed him. This one happened to me, and it's the reason I stopped doing overnight runs for small independent contracts. Big companies have their own problems, but at least there are systems. Dispatch. Records. Set routes. Somebody knows where you are supposed to be. Independent freight work can get weird. A friend of mine got me connected with a broker who handled odd-hour deliveries across a few southern states. Most were normal. Equipment parts. Medical supplies. Urgent shipments that paid better because they moved at strange times. Nothing illegal, nothing secret, just less structured. The run that changed my mind started in Georgia. I was told to pick up a palletized load from a warehouse outside Macon and deliver it directly to a receiving dock for a small manufacturing site just over the state line in Alabama. Straightforward on paper. The only unusual part was the delivery time. My pickup got delayed until late evening, and the broker told me the receiver would still be expecting it, no matter what time I got there. He said that exact phrase. I remember joking. You sure they'll be awake? He laughed and said, Trust me, somebody's always there. That should have sounded more strange than it did. I got loaded around 9:30 p.m. and headed west. Easy drive at first. Interstate, then state highway, then smaller roads as I got closer to the address. It was after midnight by the time I left the last proper town behind. And when I say town, I mean the last gas station, last traffic light, last fast food place, last sign of normal life. My GPS had me on a series of county roads cutting through dark farmland and woods. The farther I went, the less the route made sense for a manufacturing site. I was expecting an industrial park eventually. Maybe a fenced property. Maybe a cluster of buildings. Instead, I got narrower roads, patches of forest, and stretches where the trees leaned so close over the asphalt my headlights just tunneled through them. The GPS signal kept flickering too. Not fully losing me, just lagging enough to make me uneasy. At 12:47 a.m., I passed an old church with no lights on and a hand-painted sign out front. About a mile after that, my phone lost service completely. I don't love that feeling when I'm running somewhere unfamiliar. A few minutes later, the GPS told me to turn onto County Road 8. That road looked wrong immediately. Two-lane but barely maintained. Cracked pavement. No center line in places. Trees on one side, open field on the other. No houses visible. No mailboxes. No sign for any business. I actually slowed almost to a stop and checked the address again. Still right. I kept going. About 3 miles down County Road 8, I saw lights ahead. Not building lights. Floodlights. 3 of them. Harsh white lights in the distance, illuminating what looked like a wide gravel entrance and part of a chain-link fence. I felt a wave of relief and thought, okay, there it is. Then I got closer. The gate was open, but hanging crooked on one hinge. The fence ran only partway down each side before disappearing into brush. Beyond the entrance was a long gravel drive leading to a single warehouse-sized building set far back from the road. No signs. No company name. No trailers in dock. No parked cars. Just those 3 floodlights and one dark building. I stopped at the entrance and sat there with the engine idling. Everything in me said not to drive in. But I checked the paperwork again, and the address matched. I tried the broker. No signal. I tried anyway out of habit. Nothing. Then the GPS screen froze. Completely froze. I remember saying to myself, "Drop it and get out." So I drove in. The gravel drive was long enough that my headlights never fully reached the building until I was already committed. When they did, I saw it was less like a normal warehouse and more like a large metal storage building with 2 loading bays, both closed. One exterior light glowed over a side door. That was it. No movement. No sounds except my engine and gravel crunching. I backed up toward the nearest dock and stopped. Then I waited. Usually even the weirdest receivers have somebody come out after hearing a truck. Not here. I honked once. Nothing. I honked again. Still nothing. Finally I got out with my flashlight and paperwork. The air was cold and dead still. Not even insect noise. I walked to the side door and knocked. No answer. I tried the handle. Unlocked. That alone made me want to leave. I opened the door a few inches and called out, "Delivery!" My voice echoed inside. What I saw looked like an office area just beyond a short hall. Dim light somewhere deeper in the building. Enough to make shapes, not enough to feel occupied. I called out again. No answer. I should have gone back to the truck then. I know that. Instead I stepped inside. The place smelled like dust, wet concrete, and something chemical underneath. There were 2 desks in the office area. 1 overturned chair. Filing cabinets. A coffee maker. Normal enough, except everything looked slightly wrong, like it had been used recently but not properly maintained. A paper cup sat on one desk, still half full of dark liquid. I remember staring at that because it made the whole place feel occupied in the worst possible way. Not abandoned. Not active. Just paused. Then I heard a voice somewhere deeper in the building. "Back it to Dock 2." I jumped so hard I hit my shoulder on the door frame. The voice was a man's, flat and tired. I said, "You expecting a late delivery?" No answer. Just that one sentence. "Back it to Dock 2." I stepped farther into the hall and aimed the flashlight toward the back. All I saw was an open interior doorway leading into a larger dark space. I called out, "Can you sign for it?" A few seconds passed. Then the same voice said, "Just leave it." No footsteps. No movement. No person appearing. I backed out of that building immediately and went to the truck. At that point I considered leaving the whole load there and dealing with the fallout later. But because I was an idiot, and because I wanted to get paid, I repositioned to Dock 2. As I was backing, I caught movement in the mirror near the side door. A person. Tall, wearing dark clothes, standing completely still under the exterior light. I stopped and looked directly over my shoulder. Nobody was there. Just the door, half-shadowed. I told myself mirror angle. Fatigue. Nothing else. Once I was on the dock, I killed the engine and sat for a second listening. Then came 3 knocks on the driver's side door. I nearly screamed. A man was standing on the step outside my cab. No sound of approach. No flashlight. He was just there. He looked to be maybe in his 50s, thin, wearing a dark work jacket and a baseball cap. His face was hard to make out because the cab light was off and the dock light behind him left most of him in shadow. He held out a clipboard. "Paperwork." His voice sounded exactly like the one from inside. I cracked the window only a little and said, "You the receiver?" He nodded once. I slid the paperwork through the gap. He signed without saying anything and handed it back. His hand looked dirty, like grease or soil ground into the skin. I said, "You got a forklift?" He just looked at me. Then he said, "Leave the trailer." I actually laughed once because I thought I'd misheard him. "What?" "Drop the trailer and go." That snapped me fully awake. "No," I said. "Company equipment." He stared another second, then said, "Then unload it." I told him I didn't have a pallet jack on board for that kind of drop and I need help. He didn't answer. He just stepped back into the dark. I watched him go around the side of the trailer. Then I lost sight of him. I should have left right then. Instead, I got out to see where he'd gone. Nobody. Not by the trailer, not near the side door, nowhere. The whole yard was empty again. I went straight to the signed paperwork and looked at the receiver line. It didn't have a name. It had one word written in shaky block letters. "Thanks." That was it. No company stamp. No signature. Just thanks. I climbed back into the truck, locked the doors, and started the engine. At that exact moment, something hit the trailer from the inside. Hard. A metallic slam. Then another. Then a dragging sound running the length of the wall. I threw the truck into gear so fast I ground it. I pulled away from the dock, trailer shaking over gravel, and headed for the gate. As I turned the rig, my headlights swept across the side of the building. That's when I saw them. 3 people standing just beyond the floodlights. Not moving. just watching the truck leave. One tall, one shorter, one very thin. All in dark clothes. I couldn't make out faces. I hit the road and didn't slow down. The first place I got even a weak signal, I called the broker and told him I wasn't going back there and he could figure the load out himself. He sounded annoyed more than concerned. He said that receiver had used after-hours deliveries before and asked if I'd left the shipment. I told him no, and also that something was wrong with that property. He got quiet for a second, then said he'd make some calls. I took the trailer to a truck stop near the highway and parked under lights. I didn't sleep. I waited for morning and then called local law enforcement non-emergency, mostly because I didn't want whatever was in that trailer to become my problem alone. An officer met me after sunrise. We opened the trailer together. The load was still there. But two things had changed. First, one of the pallet stacks had clearly been disturbed. Boxes near the rear were cut open, then taped shut again with a different kind of tape than the warehouse used. Second, near the front wall of the trailer, written in the dust with a finger, were the words, "Wrong trailer." The officer asked if anyone besides me had access to the trailer overnight. I said not unless they got inside while I was at that building. He checked the seal history and the lock. Nothing made sense. The rear doors were still secured the way I had left them when I backed in. That afternoon the broker called me back sounding very different. He asked me for the exact address again. I gave it to him. Then he told me there was no active business registered there anymore. The property had been vacant for over 6 years. I asked him then who gave him the job. He said it had come through an older contact by email, prepaid, all paperwork looking normal. I asked if he'd ever spoken to the receiver directly. He admitted he hadn't. The best part is this. A week later, the broker emailed me copies of prior shipping confirmations tied to that same address. There had been 4 deliveries in the previous 8 months. 3 were marked complete. 1 driver refused the run after arriving and never went back. Of the 3 marked complete, 1 company had no problem on record. The second reported missing product from a sealed trailer. And the third? That driver left his trailer there overnight exactly as instructed and came back the next morning to retrieve it. The trailer was found 2 counties away, empty. No sign of the load. No sign of the driver. His cab was later recovered at a rest area with his wallet, keys, and phone still inside. That should have been enough for me. It wasn't until almost a year later that the final part happened. I was cleaning out an old document folder in my truck and found that original paperwork again. The copy with the shaky handwriting on the receiver line. Only when I looked closer in better light, I realized it didn't say thanks. It said 3. The handwriting was just messy enough that I'd read it wrong the first time. 3. The same number of people I saw standing beyond the floodlights when I drove away. And if the message on the trailer was true, then they weren't waiting for my shipment at all. They were waiting for a different driver. Which means somebody, somewhere, got my route by mistake. And I may have survived only because I brought the wrong trailer to County Road 8. So, these were the stories for today. Which story is more scary? Comment below and subscribe for more true horror stories. If you want to share your story with us, send us at belladarktales@gmail.com.